Hey guys, my name is RyanCentral and welcome to HitScan. In this video, myself and Miska sit down with Max or Arcane, who is a senior game designer for Valorant, similar to what Morello does, to talk about the recent patch. Namely, the big changes in there, the changes to Sage and Viper for example, but also the changes that weren't in there. There were no Operator or Jett nerfs, so we asked about that too. The gameplay in the background is from the Level Clash Ignition event for EU, definitely check them out, it's in the description below, and support the EU scene, because it's the better region, obviously. But the first question in this one is going to be, why was Sage hit as hard as she was in this patch?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think for most of our patches, we've tried to ease it in, right? I think a lot of the past changes to Sage have been that ease in, and I think the thing that we noticed is that they were having pretty minimal effect on her actual play, like her play rate and her win rate. So that basically when we decide to look at it, when we look at an agent to decide how to balance them, we look at community sentiment, we look at our own play, us as players, how we're feeling about it, and then we also look at all the data that we have around how often characters are being picked and how often they're winning and on which sides they're winning most frequently. So with a character like Sage, we noticed that her pick rate was through the roof, the most popular agent in the game by leaps and bounds. One of the other designers actually posted a Reddit comment yesterday, kind of about some of that additional data. She has had a pick rate over 90% almost the entire lifespan of the game, and her win rate has been the highest in the game for the majority of the game's lifetime. with minor dips at different points in time, but she's always been pretty much the highest or top 3. And that win rate has also been mostly on offense, which to us has always been not how she should be strong. We've always thought of her as a sentinel. She's really good at holding ground, fortifying locations, kind of letting her team get the job done. And so her ability to win on offense always struck us as very strange. And so many of our changes had been kind of slowly tailored towards trying to address some of that strength, that specific offensive strength. That's when we kind of, we reined in the distance on the wall. We changed some of the health tunings on the wall, things like that. We never really moved the needle too much on any of those fronts. Maybe her win rate dropped by 0.2%. That was maybe the best impact that we had with any of those small changes. She was still picked a ton. She was still winning a lot. And the pick rate, I think, is one of those things that we could probably be kind of okay with, given the reasons that a lot of people are picking her, which is they see her as a healer and they really want that healing, which there's not a lot of competition for that in the roster currently, which, we kind of knew that she was going to be picked a lot, but we still felt like she was probably picked even more than we would have expected at, over 90% for most of the game's lifetime. And we weren't seeing a lot of movement on it. We decided that we probably needed to address some deeper rooted issues in her kit. And that's where a lot of these changes stem from. There are three main things that we try to address with this set of changes. One is her power on offense. So that's something that I think that the destructible or the fortifying wall is a direct attempt at dealing with that. I think that we see a lot of Sages get up into close spots and just put up their wall and use it as this really offensive tool to just take territory. That's really not how we want that character to be playing. And so having the fortifying wall is, I think one of those areas where we can really try to address some of her offensive power and abilities to aggressively take territory. You can still use it, you can still get it up in a lot of scenarios, but you're not going to be just plopping it down in front of somebody and they just have no real recourse to it in that moment. One of the other big areas is, I think I like to call it, this is probably a bad way of describing it, but mistakes. I think it was kind of hard to actually make mistakes as Sage. With how you're using a lot of her abilities. She was able to get really high value out of pretty much everything that she did, and making a mistake was really hard. I think that's why we saw a lot of play rate out of her. She felt like a really safe pick because she always was producing value. A lot of other characters, if you throw your ability slightly wrong or you toss it slightly here or slightly there, you get almost no value out of it. The things just miss. You could blind your teammates. You can have a smoke that has a little crack in it. There's a lot of ways to mess up. And we felt like Sage couldn't really mess up. Her slow fields were these giant things that covered in the entire backs of sites. They would cover 2 different choke points simultaneously, or you could toss it anywhere in a choke and it would cover it, whether people were already coming through or they're at the back end of it. So a lot of our changes are about requiring a little bit more precision and intentionality around Sage's decisions. So when she's tossing her slow, she can still cover pretty much any choke in the game, but she needs to be accurate with how she's actually getting it there. She also needs to not just like toss it down and have it cover a whole hallway. It'll cover the end of a hallway. So if her timing is slightly more off, she won't have as much effect when actually using it. The third piece is the healing component. This feeling that Sage is a primary healer, and that's like her primary role in the roster. And I think that's one of those things that also leads to that super high pick rate. However, that's not really how we've ever seen her. That's not how we ever have wanted her to feel. The sheer amount of healing that she was able to get in some rounds just felt really, really high. Being able to heal 100 versus like what we have it as now, just 60, in most scenarios actually doesn't change the math all that much. Like people, like with how lethal the game is, how much damage guns do, the different breakpoints for the number of bullets to kill with the different weapons, there's only a couple of scenarios where it actually will make big differences, but it obviously is still impactful. We just felt like she was able to heal a little bit too much too freely. Like she was able to your team could make mistakes that left you with 1 HP and you could erase a huge portion of that mistake. And so making her a little bit less forgiving in that regard is something that was important to us. And the last note on the healing is that we also felt that her healing was outperforming a lot of duelists. So she's a sentinel. She's kind of this more supportive character. We felt like her ability to self-heal was outshining who we thought of as being our premier self-healers, which is like Reyna. Like she had a better self-heal than Reyna in a lot of regards, just because it was so flexible and you could heal yourself, you could heal allies, you didn't have any requirements on being able to do it. You just got to do it. You take some damage, you back up, you heal up, you're back to almost full health. You kind of erase that entire engagement. Whereas, a character like Reyna has to actually get a kill to be able to get that healing. That's a pretty huge barrier on having access to that value. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but I feel like I tried to cover a bunch of the different pieces.
Yeah, I think it all makes a lot of sense. Where does this get split up into, let's say, 2 patches of some of these changes coming in now and some of them coming in later? And where does this just happen all at once? Because I get that obviously the extreme pick rate and win rate and such is something that can be difficult to deal with if you're just seeing no effect from some of these other patches. But some of these changes feel a lot more impactful than some of the previous Sage changes, even on their own.
I think there's already a meme of people feeling like we nerf Sage every patch. Yeah. I don't think we actually do. I think that we haven't nerfed Sage in quite a while, but there was a series of probably 5 patches or 4 patches in a row where we did. And that becomes really tiresome to play as. Like every patch, you just expect to hear the hammer's going to drop again and again. They're going to keep chipping away. It can feel pretty exhausting, especially if you're a person who is like a Sage mate. That feels really bad. Just every patch they're nerfing me. Especially if you as a player doing it don't necessarily feel so powerful. You don't feel like, she doesn't have like an 85% win rate. She's not like super totally busted. It's more like, in the 55 to 52% range. It's like, that's still overpowered, I would argue, but it's not like game breaking. So as a player, it can feel really bad to just like, hey, I don't feel super powerful, but the game keeps telling me that my character is super busted. We're like, we can't just dole out another 6 patches in a row with continuously minor changes and potentially not moving the needle on any of them. So we felt like after basically what we had gathered and what we had learned from all the other patches that we have made, we're like, okay, we feel reasonably confident that we need some like, I would say like a directional shift with regards to the wall to actually really drive home some of the changes that we're looking to see and try to bundle it all together so we can kind of like rip the Band-Aid off. But that's only after we've built confidence in a bunch of our changes prior. I think that when you look at somebody like Breach, I think he's somebody who we haven't really touched very much. And he's somebody who we want to continue that approach of, okay, let's just try like a thing here, a thing there. We're slowly going to whittle it in. But if we keep doing that enough, we're probably going to get to a point where we feel like we've actually learned a lot about what those changes have done to the character, that we can more confidently make a bigger change that could potentially have a bigger impact if we still felt that was necessary.
Gotcha.
And that's something you said in the patch note as well, just for Breach specifically, like there might be more coming in the future. And I think the changes themselves make a lot of sense. I think people like them. But I guess the controversial one is probably the concussion one, like de-scoping, well, let's be honest, operators at this point. Like, what is kind of your like impression of like the operator stuff? Like, I guess the question is, why put that kind of tech on Breach? It feels very like you want Breach to be the anti-operator character. Whereas if that's very prevalent, you might go from deeming, in inverted commas, an operator meta, what we're in currently, into something like a breach meta, and then you have to have other agents try and counter him. Like, why put those changes on breach, I suppose, and why something so poignant to be pointed at operators in that way?
A lot of the changes that we make, I think that this actually applies to both Sage and Breach as well. A lot of the changes that we make are based on how we view these agents with regards to their role. I think that I kind of touched on that a little bit with Sage being a little bit too powerful offensively and a little bit too much of this duelist self-healer that's largely informed by her identity as a Sentinel. Breach is a character that we see as being an initiator, and I think that the initiators in our roster have felt a little bit lacking of some of that identity in some regards. Both Breach and Sova, are our two initiators, and while I think they're both good at kind of breaking onto sites and like taking ground really forcefully, they do it in really different ways, and I would argue that they also don't do it nearly with not enough potency. And that's, I think, one of the things we've been trying to figure out ways to inject a little bit more potency into somebody like Breach, into this initiator role where a lot of their power is about forcefully pushing people off of angles, forcefully stopping them from being able to just shoot you right then. I think that, when we think about Breach's direct counter to operators, it's a very intentional thing. We've seen a lot of pain from people around the operator. I think that the operator is a very important weapon for the game, and I think that it really creates a really difficult challenge for you as a team to get through. But I think one of the real issue that people have been feeling is that they don't feel like they actually have tools to deal with those operators. And so that's where I think some of these more targeted breach changes, they're designed to give you some of those tools to deal with the operator, because we know it can be a really painful thing to just peek an angle, and every round you're just dying to the same dude with the same Jett with an operator at this angle, and you feel like you don't have the tools to deal with it. It's a pretty painful thing. Yeah, so that's some of why we feel like Breach is a good person. Like his role as an initiator helps him kind of get that. That's kind of what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be pushing operators off of angle. He's supposed to be pushing defenders back from the angles that they're holding. It being specifically targeted at operators is probably more of a response to player sentiment these days than anything else.
You mentioned Jett. I don't really know of another way to ask this, but like, why wasn't there any Jett nerfs? Now, I'm not necessarily vying for them myself, but like with everything that you've said and with what like Morello said in the past and stuff about that combination with the Jett and the operator, was that something that you didn't want to necessarily touch with nerfing Jett? You didn't feel the need to, or like, what's your take on, I guess, Morello's opinion there too?
It's definitely a little low column A, low column B. I think that at most skill levels, the op is just incredibly strong. I think as you move up to the higher ends of the skill spectrum, at the pro level and like immortal level, I think that the Jett operators are definitely extra potent and extra scary, because you feel like you can do a lot of the right, quote unquote, right things, like hitting them with a concuss or flashing them off of an angle and still feel like they're able to just re-peek you and then dash away. I think the reason that we didn't address Jett this patch is there's a handful of reasons. I think that the first one is that a lot of our work that went into this patch is stuff that has been started a couple of weeks ago. It's stuff that we've been working on for a little while. It's trends over a longer period of time that we've been trying to address. I think that the Jett stuff, I think when Jett came out, people thought she was super underpowered, and we actually buffed her. And so I think a lot of the pain that people have been feeling around Jett, especially with the op, is something that's really only started to cause a stir, I feel like, in the last couple of weeks. It's definitely something that we're looking at. We're not ignoring it by any means. I think the real challenge with Jett is that her core identity of being able to escape combat with her dash, that is like the thing that she does, and I would argue that's the thing that makes her potency with the operator so high. And so trying to figure out a way and ways to address her power level without sacrificing her, like literally the thing that she does, is a pretty challenging problem that we're actively working on, and we feel like we want to give it that time to really like marinate and really understand a solution that is viable. She's got probably other power too that's not just the Jett with the operator. I would argue, you know, her ultimate has some pretty crazy power. Some of her mobility and shotguns have been another power of Jett's. I mean, it's not the operator like you asked specifically, but some of her kind of I would argue out of bounds power has been with shotguns as well, and that's where you see some of these shotgun nerfs coming through of like, hey, in air accuracy nerf. It's like that is quite literally for Jett. Like people aren't jump shotgunning; they're flying through the sky and machine gunning you with a shotgun.
Yeah.
So that's one of the areas. But yeah, I think it really comes down to us wanting to spend more time on the issue. For what it's worth, it's also one of those things that does target. It hits higher skill players more than it does the average player. Like at the pro level, we see a lot of dominance from these Jett players because she is such a high skill cap champion. And so we're just trying to figure out ways to really target our changes.
And that's it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. We have more questions to be answered by Max. This is probably going to be a two-parter with other questions surrounding the Viper buffs, why Cypher hasn't been nerfed at all at this point and his state in the game, and also future changes that we can expect to see. Definitely keep an eye out for that video, like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification to make sure you see it when it happens, and also if any other news hits. But until next time, take care, we'll see you then.